I walked into what I thought would be my promotion meeting that Tuesday morning, coffee in hand and presentation slides ready on my laptop. My father, Thomas, sat behind his mahogany desk, legal documents spread across the surface like fallen autumn leaves. The morning light streaming through his office windows caught the gold lettering on the papers as he spoke words that would shatter my world completely. "You'll always be my daughter," he said softly, his pen moving across each signature line with deliberate precision. I watched 20 years of my life dissolve with every stroke as he transferred complete ownership of our family logistics company to my younger sister, Jessica. The silence in that room felt heavier than concrete. I said absolutely nothing, just quietly cleared my personal belongings from my desk, never imagining the 21 frantic voicemails awaiting me the following dawn. The drive home that afternoon felt like swimming through molasses. Every traffic light seemed to mock me. Every familiar billboard reminded me of contracts I had negotiated, routes I had optimized, relationships I had built over 2 decades of dedication. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for 30 minutes, engine off, trying to process what had just occurred in that oak-paneled office. My mind wandered back to age 8 when I first started helping at Wilson Logistics. Dad would lift me onto his lap behind that same mahogany desk, teaching me to sort invoices by priority and destination zones. I remembered the smell of coffee mixed with fresh printer paper, the rhythmic sound of trucks backing up to our loading docks, the pride in his voice when he introduced me to clients as his future business partner. By high school, I was working 20 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 grade average. I learned our inventory management system inside and out, memorized freight classifications, understood the intricate dance of supply chain coordination. Other teenagers spent summers at the beach, but I spent mine in our warehouse learning how proper logistics could make or break a manufacturing company's entire operation. College brought new challenges. I earned my business administration degree from State University while working full-time in our operations department. My senior thesis focused on implementing automated tracking systems that could reduce delivery errors by 43%. Dad read every word twice and implemented my recommendations the following quarter. The results spoke volumes. Our customer retention rate jumped from 78 to 94% within 18 months. Revenue tripled as word spread about our reliability and innovation. I negotiated partnerships with 3 major manufacturing firms, established our employee wellness program that reduced staff turnover by 60%, and created the customer feedback system that became our competitive advantage. Meanwhile, Jessica pursued her passion for fine arts at an expensive private college in California. She spent junior year studying sculpture in Italy, senior year painting in France. After graduation, she backpacked through Asia for 8 months, then moved to Portland to explore the music scene. Business discussions bored her. She yawned through the few board meetings she attended, usually checking her phone or sketching abstract designs on meeting agendas. But 3 months ago, something shifted. Jessica started showing unexpected interest in company operations. She began attending weekly management meetings, asking detailed questions about profit margins and growth projections. I welcomed her newfound enthusiasm, thinking she finally understood the beauty of what we had built together. Now I realized how naive that assumption had been. Sitting in my car, replaying every recent interaction, I saw the manipulation hiding beneath her sudden engagement. The way she subtly questioned my decisions during meetings, how she positioned herself as the concerned daughter protecting Dad's legacy, the private conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "The Henderson contract needs your signature by 5. Should I bring it by your office?" I stared at the message, realizing I no longer had an office, no longer had authority to sign contracts, no longer had any role in the company I had devoted my entire adult life to building. The cruelest part was how Dad delivered the news, not with anger or disappointment, but with resignation mixed with what seemed like sadness. "Business requires difficult decisions," he had said, not meeting my eyes. "Jessica has convinced me this transition serves the company's best interests." convinced him of what exactly that 20 years of proven dedication meant nothing, that my innovations and relationships were somehow threatening, that Jessica, who couldn't balance her personal checkbook, was better equipped to lead a multi-million-dollar logistics operation. I finally gathered enough energy to walk inside my house, but sleep proved impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's triumphant smile as Dad signed those papers, the way she avoided eye contact with me throughout the entire meeting, how quickly she started discussing new directions for the company before I had even left the building. Something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Dad's decision contradicted everything he had taught me about business, family, and loyalty. This wasn't the man who had encouraged my ambition, supported my education, and celebrated every company milestone as our shared achievement. I spent the early morning hours pacing my kitchen, trying to understand what had changed his perception so dramatically. What evidence had Jessica presented? What arguments had she made during those private meetings? And why did I feel like I was missing crucial pieces of a puzzle that would explain everything sleep refused to come that first night? By 4 a.m, I was dressed and driving toward the old neighborhood where I grew up. The streets felt different now, like returning to a childhood home that had been sold to strangers. I parked across from Dad's house, watching the windows for any sign of movement. The front porch light was still on, which meant someone was awake, probably Dad, who had always been an early riser. I walked to the front door using the spare key hidden under the ceramic garden gnome Mom had placed there 15 years ago. The house felt eerily quiet as I stepped inside. Dad's reading chair sat empty in the living room, yesterday's newspaper folded beside his coffee mug. I could hear water running upstairs, so he was apparently getting ready for another day at the office that was no longer mine to enter. That's when I noticed Jessica's laptop sitting open on the kitchen counter, apparently forgotten in her rush to get home after yesterday's triumph. The screen was still illuminated, showing her email inbox. I knew I shouldn't look, but something compelled me to step closer. What I discovered made my stomach lurch violently. The first email was from someone named Vincent Torino, dated just 4 days ago. The subject line read, "Final payment required." The message was brief but terrifying. "Jessica, our patience has reached its limit. 200,000 by Friday, or we pursue alternative collection methods. Your family's safety depends on immediate payment." I scrolled through more messages, each one painting a clearer picture of Jessica's hidden crisis. Bank statements showed gambling losses at underground poker games totaling $68,000 in the past 6 months. Online betting accounts revealed even larger losses on sports wagering and casino games. But the most damning evidence was a folder labeled Dad Conversations. Inside were audio recordings of phone calls between Jessica and our father dating back 3 months. I plugged in her earbuds and listened to the most recent one. "Dad, I'm really worried about Sonia," Jessica's voice said through the speakers. "I've been noticing some concerning behavior lately." "What kind of behavior?" Dad's voice sounded tired, slightly confused. "She's been making unauthorized changes to client contracts. And yesterday I saw her copying confidential files to a personal drive. I think she might be planning to start a competing business." My hands shook as I listened to her systematic destruction of my reputation. She had coached Dad through multiple conversations, feeding him specific concerns about my supposed disloyalty. Each recording showed her building a narrative that painted me as greedy, ambitious, and willing to betray family trust for personal gain. The final recording was the most devastating. Jessica had apparently called Dad the night before our meeting, reinforcing all her previous accusations while adding new ones. "I have proof that Sonia has been in contact with Hartwell Industries," she said, referring to our biggest competitor. "She's been sharing our customer lists and pricing strategies with them. I'm afraid if we don't act quickly, she'll destroy everything you've worked to build." None of it was true. Not a single accusation. But listening to Dad's responses, I could hear how the constant repetition of these lies had worn down his trust in me. Jessica had created doubt, where none should have existed, planted seeds of suspicion that grew into complete betrayal of our relationship. I continued scrolling through her files and found something even more shocking. Text message conversations with loan sharks revealed the true scope of her desperation. She owed money to multiple criminal organizations across the state. The messages contained explicit threats against her physical safety and increasingly aggressive demands for immediate payment. One message chain showed Jessica explaining her plan to use the family business as collateral for emergency loans. She'd already been in contact with predatory lenders who specialized in quick cash advances against business assets. The interest rates were astronomical, and the repayment terms would have bankrupted the company within months. Another folder contained emails with a financial consultant named Bradley Morrison, who specialized in what he called rapid asset liquidation for distressed business owners. Their correspondence revealed Jessica's intention to sell company equipment, cancel profitable contracts, and transfer operating funds to personal accounts as quickly as possible after gaining control. She hadn't wanted the business to run it. She wanted it to strip it bare for quick cash to pay her gambling debts. The most chilling discovery was a recorded phone call between Jessica and someone who identified himself only as Tony. The conversation took place just 2 weeks ago. "Your dad bought the story about your sister completely," Jessica said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "He actually believes she's been trying to sell company secrets. By next week, I'll have full control and can start liquidating assets immediately." "You better not be playing games with us, sweetheart," Tony's voice replied. 200 grand by Friday, or your whole family learns what happens when people don't pay their debts." The conversation continued with Tony providing specific instructions on which company assets would be easiest to convert to cash quickly. He had obviously researched our business thoroughly and knew exactly what equipment and contracts would bring the highest prices in emergency sales. I sat in Dad's kitchen as dawn light filtered through the windows, trying to process the magnitude of Jessica's betrayal. She hadn't just lied about my loyalty to gain control of the company. She had systematically manipulated. Our father exploited his trust and put our entire family in danger to cover her gambling addiction. The woman I had grown up with, shared secrets with, supported through every challenge, had been willing to destroy my life, and Dad's legacy to escape the consequences of her own choices. I barely made it to the parking lot of Wilson Logistics before breaking down completely. 24 hours ago, I had pulled into this same spot thinking about quarterly projections and the Henderson contract. Now I sat in my car staring at the building where I had spent the majority of my adult life, knowing I no longer belonged inside. Marcus Webb, our chief financial officer, knocked on my passenger window. I had worked closely with Marcus for 8 years, ever since Dad hired him away from a larger firm. He was methodical, honest, and had an almost supernatural ability to spot financial irregularities before they became serious problems. "Sonia, can we talk?" His expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. I rolled down the window, not trusting myself to speak without crying again. "Not here," Marcus said, glancing toward the building. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street in 10 minutes. There are some things you need to know." The drive to Brewer's Corner felt like navigating through fog. My brain couldn't seem to process normal functions like checking mirrors or signaling turns. I found Marcus already seated in a back booth, a manila envelope positioned between 2 untouched cups of coffee. "I've been waiting for the right moment to approach you," Marcus began without preamble. "What happened yesterday confirmed my worst fears about where this company is heading." He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of financial documents I had never seen before, bank statements showing irregular transfers, email communications between Jessica and people I didn't recognize, timestamps proving someone had accessed confidential client files using administrative override codes. "I've been documenting irregularities for the past 6 weeks, Marcus explained. "It started when I noticed unusual account activity that coincided with your sister's increased involvement in company operations. Small amounts at first, but the pattern was concerning. The documents revealed a sophisticated scheme. Jessica had been creating false vendor accounts approving invoices for services that were never provided and redirecting payments to accounts she controlled. The individual amounts were small enough to avoid triggering automatic auditing protocols, but collectively, they totaled nearly $47,000. "She's been very careful," Marcus continued, "but she made one crucial mistake. She used the same routing number for 3 different fake vendors. That's when I started paying closer attention to her activities." More documents showed Jessica accessing client files she had no business reviewing. Customer contact information, pricing strategies, delivery schedules, and contract renewal dates had all been downloaded to external drives during late-night sessions when she thought no one would notice. "The security system logs every file access," Marcus explained. "Jessica has been systematically copying our most valuable proprietary information. Based on the timestamps, she's been doing this for at least 2 months. I studied the evidence, feeling sick as the implications became clear. She's been planning this takeover for weeks." "Longer than that," Marcus replied grimly. "I think she's been feeding information to our competitors while simultaneously building a case against you with your father. The timing is too precise to be coincidental." He pulled out additional paperwork showing canceled contracts and equipment sales that had been authorized just yesterday, hours after Dad signed the transfer documents. Jessica had wasted no time beginning what appeared to be a systematic liquidation of company assets. "The Henderson contract you were working on canceled this morning. The Riverside warehouse lease, Jessica terminated it effective next week. She's moving fast, like someone who needs cash immediately, rather than someone planning to build the business long-term." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sonia, I think your sister is in serious trouble. The kind of trouble that explains why she would be willing to destroy everything your family has built." I told him about the laptop evidence I had discovered that morning, Jessica's gambling debts, the threatening messages, her plans to use the company as collateral for emergency loans. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. "That explains the rush to liquidate assets," he said when I finished. "She needs cash fast, and she's willing to sacrifice the company's long-term viability to get it." We spent the next hour reviewing every document Marcus had collected. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone systematically stealing from the company while manipulating its owner to gain control. Jessica had been working multiple angles, simultaneously embezzling funds, selling proprietary information, and positioning herself as the responsible daughter, protecting the business from my supposed treachery. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of her deception. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options carefully. "I've worked with your father for 8 years, he finally said. "I know his character, and I know yours. What Jessica told him about you doesn't match anything I've observed during our time working together." He paused, then made a decision that would change everything. "I'm willing to help you expose what's really happening, but we need to move carefully. Jessica has already demonstrated she's willing to fabricate evidence and manipulate your father. If she feels cornered, she might escalate her efforts to discredit you." "What are you thinking?" "We need irrefutable proof of her crimes before we confront anyone, documentation that can't be dismissed or explained away, and we need to understand the full scope of her plan before she can do irreversible damage to the company." Marcus outlined a risky strategy. We would continue gathering evidence while Jessica believed she had successfully eliminated me as a threat. He would maintain his position as CFO, documenting every transaction and decision Jessica made. Meanwhile, I would investigate her gambling debts and the people who were pressuring her for payment. "This is dangerous for both of us," Marcus warned. "If Jessica discovers what we're doing, she could destroy evidence or accelerate her timeline. And frankly, if she's involved with the kind of people who make violent threats over gambling debts, we need to be very careful about how we proceed." Despite the risks, I felt hope for the first time since walking into Dad's office the previous day. I wasn't alone in this fight. Marcus had seen through Jessica's manipulation and was willing to risk his own career to help expose the truth. "How much time do we have?" I asked. Marcus checked his watch and frowned. "Based on the asset sales she's already initiated, I'd estimate we have 48 hours before she does irreversible damage to the company's operational capacity. After that, even if we prove her crimes, there might not be enough left to save." We decided to split our efforts for maximum effectiveness. Marcus would focus on documenting Jessica's financial crimes from inside the company, while I investigated her gambling connections and the external pressures driving her desperation. My first stop was Valley Medical Center, where Dr. Elizabeth Patterson had been Dad's physician for the past 12 years. I called ahead, explaining that I was concerned about his recent decision-making and wanted to discuss whether any medical factors might be influencing his judgment. Dr. Patterson agreed to meet during her lunch break, but her expression when I arrived at her office told me she had been expecting this conversation. "I was wondering when someone from your family would contact me," she said, closing her office door behind us. "Your father's recent behavior during appointments has been concerning." She explained that Dad had been experiencing memory lapses and confusion during routine checkups. Simple questions about current medications or recent symptoms sometimes left him looking blank and frustrated. More troubling was his apparent inability to remember conversations they had during previous visits. Initially, I attributed it to normal aging and stress from running a demanding business, Dr. Patterson continued, but the symptoms have been progressing more rapidly than I would expect for someone his age. She pulled out a thick medical file. 3 months ago, I recommended neurological testing to rule out early-stage dementia. Your father scheduled the appointment but canceled at the last minute. When I called to reschedule, your sister Jessica told me that he was too busy with important business decisions to take time for unnecessary tests. The timeline aligned perfectly with Jessica's increased involvement in company operations. Did my father seem confused about the importance of those tests? That's what concerned me most, Dr. Patterson replied. During our initial discussion, your father was very interested in understanding his memory issues and committed to following through with testing. But when Jessica called to cancel, she claimed he had decided the symptoms weren't significant enough to warrant further investigation. Dr. Patterson had attempted to contact Dad directly several times, but Jessica always answered his phone and explained that he was too busy to discuss medical matters. Eventually, the doctor stopped calling, assuming the family had decided to address the memory concerns through other channels. I should have been more persistent, she admitted, but Jessica assured me that she was monitoring his condition closely and would contact me if the symptoms worsened. I asked whether the type of memory loss Dad was experiencing could make him more susceptible to manipulation or false information. Dr. Patterson's expression grew even more serious. Absolutely. Early-stage dementia often affects a person's ability to distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources of information. Family members who spend more time with the patient can significantly influence their perception of events, especially if they're providing consistent but inaccurate narratives. She explained that people experiencing cognitive decline often develop what doctors call confabulation, where they unconsciously fill memory gaps with information that seems plausible, even if it's not based on actual experiences. If someone were systematically providing false information about family relationships or business matters, a person with early dementia might accept that information as factual, especially if it's repeated consistently over time. The conversation confirmed my worst fears. Jessica hadn't just lied to Dad about my supposed disloyalty. She had exploited his medical vulnerability to make those lies seem believable. She'd isolated him from objective medical evaluation while positioning herself as his primary source of information about family dynamics. Dr. Patterson, would you be willing to document these concerns formally? My family is dealing with some serious business decisions, and I believe my father's medical condition is being exploited by someone who doesn't have his best interests at heart. She agreed immediately. I've been troubled by this situation for weeks. If your father's cognitive issues are being manipulated for someone else's benefit, that constitutes a form of elder abuse that I'm obligated to report. After leaving the medical center, I drove to the address I had found in Jessica's communications with Tony, one of her gambling creditors. The location turned out to be a legitimate-looking office building in the business district, but the third-floor suite housing Pacific Financial Services felt distinctly uncomfortable. The waiting room was empty except for a receptionist who looked like she moonlighted as a bouncer. She directed me to wait while she confirmed whether Mr. Anthony was available to discuss Jessica Wilson's account status. Tony emerged 5 minutes later, average height, expensive suit, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the sister Jessica mentioned. Please come back to my office." His office was carefully decorated to project legitimacy, but something about the atmosphere felt threatening. Tony closed the door and offered me coffee, which I declined. "Jessica spoke very highly of you during our recent conversations." He began settling behind an imposing oak desk. "She mentioned you work in the family business." I explained that I was trying to understand the nature of Jessica's financial obligations and whether there might be payment alternatives that didn't involve liquidating business assets. Tony's smile became more predatory. "Your sister owes our organization $200,000 plus accumulated interest and fees. The debt originated from poker games and sports betting activities over the past 8 months. He opened a file folder and showed me documentation of Jessica's gambling losses. The individual amounts started small but escalated dramatically as she tried to recover previous losses through increasingly reckless bets. Jessica assured us that she would have access to significant business assets by this week. We extended her payment deadline based on those assurances. But our patience has limits, especially when family members become involved in the debt resolution process. The threat was clear, though delivered with businessman-like politeness. Tony expected payment by Friday, and he didn't particularly care whether it came from Jessica or other family members. "What happens if the payment doesn't arrive on time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We pursue alternative collection strategies," Tony replied smoothly. Jessica signed agreements acknowledging that family assets could be considered collateral for her debts. We take those agreements very seriously. I left that meeting understanding why Jessica had been so desperate to gain control of the company. She hadn't just stolen money to pay gambling debts, she had apparently pledged family assets as security for loans she couldn't repay. Our business, our property, and possibly our physical safety were all at risk because of her addiction. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. As I drove home that evening, I received a call from Janet Morrison, who had cleaned Dad's house every Thursday for the past 6 years. "I hope you don't mind me calling," Janet said hesitantly, "but I've been worried about your father, and I didn't know who else to talk to." Janet explained that Dad's behavior during her weekly visits had changed dramatically over the past 2 months. He seemed confused about basic household routines, frequently asked about conversations he couldn't remember having, and often appeared anxious when discussing family matters. "The strange thing is how different he seems when Jessica is there," Janet continued. "When she's in the house, your father becomes agitated and repetitive, but on days when she's not around, he seems much more like his old self." Janet had overheard several phone conversations where Jessica was coaching Dad on what to say about family business matters. She would tell him specific things to remember about you and then ask him to repeat those things back to her until he got them exactly right. Most disturbing was Janet's observation that Jessica had been adjusting Dad's daily medications. She told me she was helping him stay organized with his pills, but I noticed she sometimes gave him extra doses when he started asking questions about things she had told him earlier. The picture was now complete. Jessica had systematically isolated Dad from objective medical care, exploited his cognitive vulnerability to plant false memories about my supposed betrayal, and used her position as his caregiver to control information and manipulate his mental state when necessary. She hadn't just stolen money from the company or lied about my loyalty. She had committed elder abuse against our father to cover her gambling addiction and protect herself from violent criminals who threatened our entire family. Working through the night, Marcus and I met at his home office to compile everything we had discovered. His kitchen table became our makeshift command center, covered with financial documents, medical records, and printed emails that painted a comprehensive picture of Jessica's systematic fraud. Marcus had spent the afternoon conducting what he called forensic accounting on Jessica's activities since gaining company control. The results were even worse than we had initially suspected. She's not just liquidating assets randomly, Marcus explained, pointing to a timeline he had created. There's a specific strategy here. She's targeting the company's most valuable and easily transferable resources first. The Henderson contract I had negotiated wasn't just canceled. Jessica had sold our exclusive delivery routes to Hartwell Industries for 37% below market value. The Riverside warehouse wasn't simply terminated, she had sold our remaining lease obligations to a competitor, giving them access to our strategic location in the industrial district. Look at this. Marcus continued showing me equipment sales records. Our 3 newest delivery trucks were sold yesterday to a liquidation company for 60 cents on the dollar. The same trucks that are financed through our business credit line, meaning she essentially sold collateral that secures company debt. Even more alarming were the personnel changes Jessica had implemented in just 2 days. She had terminated 5 longtime employees, including our head of customer relations and our most experienced logistics coordinator. These weren't cost-cutting measures. They were eliminations of people who understood the business well enough to question her decisions. She's removing anyone who might challenge her authority or expose what she's doing, I realized. By the time people understand what's happening, there won't be anyone left with enough institutional knowledge to stop her. Marcus pulled out a folder containing the most damning evidence yet. This afternoon, I discovered something that changes everything. Jessica has been in contact with Hartwell Industries for the past 6 weeks, and they're not just buying our canceled contracts. The documents show detailed communications between Jessica and Hartwell's acquisition team. They weren't interested in purchasing individual assets or contracts. They wanted to buy the entire company at a dramatically reduced price that would barely cover Jessica's immediate debts. The sale is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Marcus said grimly. Jessica has been negotiating the terms while telling your father that she's implementing cost-saving measures to strengthen the company's financial position. I stared at the purchase agreement, feeling sick as I realized the scope of Jessica's betrayal. The sale price was roughly 40% of the company's actual value, but it would provide enough cash to pay her gambling debts while leaving our family with nothing. Dad doesn't know about this sale. Based on what I can determine, she's been telling him that she's negotiating new partnerships and contracts. The legal paperwork refers to strategic business alliances and operational restructuring, but the reality is complete liquidation disguised as corporate development. We continued reviewing documents until nearly midnight, uncovering layer after layer of deception. Jessica had forged Dad's signature on multiple financial authorizations. She had created false vendor accounts to justify transferring company funds to personal accounts. Most shocking of all, she had been selling confidential customer information to competitors, while simultaneously positioning herself as the family member, working to protect those same business relationships. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice heavy with concern. "I found evidence that Jessica has been consulting with a probate attorney about inheritance law and elder care legislation. The consultation records suggested Jessica was researching legal mechanisms for gaining control over Dad's personal assets, in addition to the business. She had specifically inquired about guardianship procedures for family members experiencing cognitive decline. If she can have your father declared legally incompetent, she would gain complete control over his finances, his property, and his medical care decisions." The implications were terrifying. Jessica wasn't just stealing the company, she was planning to institutionalize Dad and seize control of everything he owned. Her gambling debts had apparently escalated beyond what even liquidating the business could cover. I called Dr. Patterson on her emergency line explaining what we had discovered about Jessica's consultation with probate attorneys. The doctor was alarmed but not entirely surprised. Elder abuse often escalates when the perpetrator feels cornered or desperate, she explained. If Jessica is facing immediate threats from her creditors, she might view complete control over your father's assets as her only option for long-term financial security. Dr. Patterson agreed to expedite Dad's neurological evaluation and provide medical testimony about Jessica's interference with his care. I can have him evaluated tomorrow morning by a specialist I trust. If the results show early-stage dementia, we'll have medical evidence that Jessica has been exploiting his condition for financial gain. As Marcus and I prepared to leave his house that night, my phone buzzed with an urgent text message from an unknown number. Jessica Wilson's payment deadline has been moved to tomorrow evening. Family members are advised to ensure compliance to avoid enforcement activities. The message was signed Pacific Financial Services, Tony's organization. Jessica's creditors were apparently losing patience with the payment schedule and were now directly threatening our family. "We're running out of time," Marcus said, reading the message over my shoulder. "If Jessica completes the sale to Hartwell tomorrow, she'll have the cash to pay her debts, but your family will lose everything." I spent that sleepless night developing a plan that felt both necessary and terrifying. We needed to prevent the company's sale while simultaneously protecting Dad from Jessica's manipulation. But confronting her directly might cause her to accelerate her timeline or take more desperate measures. "We need help," I told Marcus when he called at 6 a.m. "This is bigger than financial fraud. Jessica is committing elder abuse and she's involving our family with dangerous people. I think we need to contact law enforcement." Marcus had reached the same conclusion. "I've been researching federal regulations about elder abuse and business fraud. What Jessica is doing constitutes wire fraud, which is a federal crime. The FBI has a white-collar crime division that handles exactly these types of cases." We decided to contact Agent Sarah Rodriguez, who specialized in family-based financial crimes. Marcus had worked with her on a previous case involving embezzlement at his former company, and he trusted her discretion and expertise. Agent Rodriguez agreed to meet us that morning at the federal building downtown. When we arrived, she had already begun reviewing the preliminary evidence Marcus had forwarded overnight. "This is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've seen," she said after examining our documentation. "Your sister has committed multiple federal crimes, and the involvement of criminal organizations in debt collection adds another layer of complexity." Agent Rodriguez explained that gambling debts to illegal operations often involve money laundering and racketeering charges. If Jessica's creditors were part of a larger criminal organization, our case might connect to ongoing federal investigations into organized crime activities. "We need to move quickly," the agent continued. "Based on your timeline, Jessica plans to complete asset liquidation today. Once those sales are finalized, recovering the stolen value becomes much more difficult." She outlined a plan that would require precise coordination. Federal agents would monitor Jessica's scheduled meeting with Hartwell Industries while we arranged for Dad's medical evaluation. If the neurological testing confirmed cognitive impairment, they could obtain emergency injunctions preventing further asset sales while Jessica was under investigation. The key is catching her in the act of completing fraudulent transactions, while we have medical evidence that she's been exploiting your father's diminished capacity. As we prepared to leave Agent Rodriguez's office, she issued a warning that made my blood run cold. "Ms. Wilson, if your sister is as desperate as these documents suggest, she may take extreme measures when she realizes her plan is being exposed. Criminal organizations that make violent threats over gambling debts don't typically accept partial payments or extended deadlines." The implication was clear. Jessica might be in as much danger from her creditors as the rest of our family was from her fraud. Her desperation could make her unpredictable and potentially dangerous to everyone involved. The next morning brought an unexpected discovery that changed everything we thought we understood about Jessica's plan. While Dad was undergoing neurological testing at Valley Medical Center, I used my spare key to search Jessica's apartment for additional evidence. What I found hidden in her bedroom closet made me realize we had only scratched the surface of her deception. A fireproof safe carelessly left open in her rush to get to the Hartwell Industries meeting contained documents that revealed the true scope of her scheme. Estate planning paperwork showed that Jessica had convinced Dad to revise his will just 2 weeks ago, completely removing me as a beneficiary and leaving all personal assets to her. The new will cited irreconcilable differences regarding business philosophy and family loyalty as justification for my disinheritance. Attached notes in Jessica's handwriting revealed the manipulation tactics she had used to convince Dad that I was planning to have him declared mentally incompetent so I could seize control of his assets. Sonia has been researching guardianship law. One note read in Jessica's distinctive script: "She's planning to use your memory issues against you. I'm the only one protecting you from her schemes." The cruelest part was how she had twisted Dad's legitimate concerns about his cognitive decline into paranoia about my intentions. Medical appointments he couldn't remember became evidence that I was secretly consulting with doctors about his competency. Business discussions I had initiated became proof that I was planning a hostile takeover of his personal wealth. But the most shocking discovery was a recorded conversation between Jessica and Dad dated just 3 days ago. I plugged in headphones and listened to her systematically destroying our relationship while positioning herself as his protector. "I hate having to tell you this, Dad, but I found evidence that Sonia has been meeting with elder law attorneys," Jessica's voice said through the recording. "She's been asking about procedures for having family members declared incompetent." "That doesn't sound like Sonia," Dad's voice replied, but he sounded uncertain and tired. "I know it's hard to believe, but people change when money is involved. She's been resentful ever since you started including me in business decisions. I think she sees your memory issues as an opportunity to take control of everything." The recording continued with Jessica providing specific evidence of my supposed schemes. Phone calls I had supposedly made to attorneys' documents. I had allegedly copied conversations I had apparently had with competitors about purchasing the company assets. None of it was true, but Jessica's delivery was so convincing, her concern so seemingly genuine, that I could understand how Dad might have believed her accusations. She had exploited his confusion and memory gaps to create false memories of my betrayal. More recordings revealed the extent of her psychological manipulation. Jessica had been systematically isolating Dad from friends and advisors who might have questioned her narrative. She convinced him that longtime business associates were secretly working with me to undermine his authority. Family friends who expressed concern about his well-being were portrayed as conspirators in my supposed plot. The final folder contained Jessica's research into private care facilities for dementia patients. She had visited 3 expensive institutions in remote locations, apparently planning to have Dad committed immediately after gaining control of his assets. Her notes were chilling: need facilities with limited visitor access and strict confidentiality policies. Goal is to minimize outside contact that might interfere with asset management decisions. Jessica hadn't just planned to steal Dad's money. She intended to isolate him completely while she liquidated his life's work. The care facilities she had selected were more like prisons than medical centers designed to keep residents separated from family members who might challenge their treatment. I photographed every document in the safe before carefully replacing everything exactly as I had found it. Jessica's apartment showed signs of hasty packing, suggesting she was preparing to leave town as soon as her financial obligations were resolved. My phone rang as I was leaving the building. Marcus's voice was tense with urgency. "Sonia, we have a problem. Jessica moved up the Hartwell meeting to this afternoon, and she's demanding immediate closing. They're planning to complete the sale today instead of tomorrow." The timeline had collapsed. Instead of having until tomorrow evening to stop Jessica's plan, we now had less than 4 hours before she sold the company and disappeared with enough money to pay her debts and start over somewhere else. "There's more," Marcus continued. "I just received a call from building security. Jessica spent an hour in your father's office this morning, and they heard what sounded like an argument. When security checked on the situation, they found your father sitting alone, looking confused and upset. Agent Rodriguez confirmed our worst fears when I called her emergency line. Jessica had apparently convinced Dad to sign additional authorization documents during their morning meeting. Financial transfer forms that would give her complete access to his personal bank accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate holdings. We're expediting the federal injunction, but the paperwork won't be ready until tomorrow morning, Agent Rodriguez explained. If Jessica completes the company's sale today, she'll have accomplished most of her objectives before we can legally intervene. Dr. Patterson called with the neurological test results just as I was racing toward the Hartwell Industries building. Dad's evaluation confirmed early-stage Alzheimer's disease, with significant impairment in areas related to financial decision-making and susceptibility to manipulation. Your father's condition explains why Jessica's false information seemed believable to him, Dr. Patterson said. People with early Alzheimer's often lose the ability to critically evaluate conflicting information, especially when it comes from family members they trust. The medical diagnosis provided crucial evidence of Dad's diminished capacity, but it also confirmed that every document Jessica had convinced him to sign over the past 3 months was legally questionable. He had been making major financial decisions while suffering from a condition that specifically impaired his judgment about exactly those types of choices. I arrived at Hartwell Industries 15 minutes before Jessica's scheduled meeting, hoping to find some way to prevent the sale, or at least delay it until federal authorities could intervene. But as I sat in the parking lot watching Jessica's car pull up to the building, I realized that direct confrontation might be our only remaining option. Everything we had worked to build, everything Dad had devoted his life to creating, was about to be destroyed by someone who saw our family legacy as nothing more than a source of quick cash to escape the consequences of her own addiction. My phone rang just as Jessica disappeared into the Hartwell Industries building. Dr. Patterson's name appeared on the screen, and her voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Sonia, I need to speak with you immediately. I just finished reviewing your father's medical records more thoroughly, and I discovered something that changes everything." She explained that while organizing Dad's file for the federal investigation, she had found appointment records that didn't match her memory of recent visits. Several entries showed consultations and test results she had never conducted or received. "Someone has been falsifying medical records in your father's file, entries that make his cognitive decline appear more severe than my actual observations indicated. The dates correspond exactly with periods when Jessica was supposedly helping coordinate his care." Dr. Patterson had contacted the hospital's medical records department and discovered that Jessica had been using forged authorization forms to access and modify Dad's medical information. She had been adding false entries that supported her narrative about his declining mental capacity, while deleting notes that documented his periods of clarity. The most concerning discovery is that Jessica has been consulting with Dr. William Harper, a psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations for legal proceedings. She scheduled an appointment for your father tomorrow morning, apparently planning to have him declared legally incompetent immediately after completing the business sale. This revelation explained Jessica's accelerated timeline. She wasn't just planning to steal company assets. She intended to have Dad declared incapable of managing his affairs before anyone could challenge the legitimacy of documents he had signed while confused or manipulated. Dr. Harper's evaluation would have given Jessica legal guardianship over your father's remaining assets and medical decisions. Dr. Patterson continued. Based on the falsified records Jessica created, her request for emergency guardianship would likely have been approved. I sat in the Hartwell parking lot trying to process the magnitude of Jessica's systematic plan. She had been manipulating medical records, forging authorization documents, and preparing to have our father institutionalized against his will. This went beyond financial fraud into territory that felt almost sociopathic in its calculated cruelty. Dr. Patterson had already contacted medical authorities about the falsified records and was preparing formal documentation of Jessica's interference with Dad's care. But that evidence wouldn't prevent the business sale scheduled to begin in just minutes. That's when Dr. Patterson shared information that changed our entire strategy. "Sonia, there's something else you need to know about your father's condition. While he does have early-stage cognitive impairment, his lucid periods are much longer and more frequent than Jessica has led anyone to believe. She's been administering additional doses of his confusion medication to increase his disorientation during important meetings." My father's housekeeper, Janet Morrison, had been documenting these medication irregularities for weeks, worried that Jessica was not following proper dosing schedules. Her detailed notes showed a clear pattern. Dad received extra medication on days when Jessica needed him to be confused or compliant. "Your father is significantly more aware of his situation than Jessica realizes," Dr. Patterson explained. "During periods when his medication is properly regulated, his cognitive function is much closer to normal." This information gave me hope, but also filled me with rage. Jessica hadn't just exploited Dad's medical condition, she had been deliberately worsening it to maintain control over his decision-making. I called Marcus with a desperate idea that felt like our last chance to stop the sale. What if Dad is more aware of what's happening than Jessica thinks? What if we could reach him during one of his lucid periods and help him understand what she's been doing? Marcus was skeptical but willing to try anything. "Where is your father now?" "Probably at home, recovering from this morning's medical appointment. If Jessica is in this meeting for the next 2 hours, we might have a window to talk with him while she can't interfere." I drove to Dad's house while Marcus contacted Agent Rodriguez to update her on our plan. If we could help Dad understand Jessica's deception during a clear mental period, he might be able to revoke the authorizations she had obtained through manipulation. Janet Morrison met me at the front door, looking relieved to see me. "Your father has been asking about you all morning," she said quietly. "He seems more like himself today than he has in weeks." I found Dad sitting in his favorite chair, looking tired but alert. When he saw me, his expression shifted through confusion, recognition, and what looked like relief. "Sonia," he said, his voice stronger than I had heard it in months. "I've been so confused about everything that's been happening. Jessica told me things about you that didn't make sense, but I couldn't seem to think clearly enough to question them." For the next hour, I carefully explained what we had discovered about Jessica's gambling debts, her manipulation of his medical records, and her plan to liquidate the company. I showed him copies of the evidence Marcus and I had gathered, watching his expression change from confusion to horror to anger. "She's been lying to me about everything," he said. Finally, his voice filled with pain and betrayal. I knew something felt wrong about the decisions I was making, but she convinced me that my confusion was making me unable to trust my own judgment about family matters. Dad's clarity during this conversation was remarkable. He understood the financial implications of Jessica's fraud, the legal consequences of her elder abuse, and the danger our family faced from her gambling creditors. "We need to stop that sale immediately," he said, reaching for his phone. "And I need to revoke every document I signed while she was manipulating my medication and my thinking." But when Dad tried to call Hartwell Industries, we discovered that Jessica had been even more thorough than we realized. She had apparently told the company that he was suffering from severe dementia, and that any contact from him should be ignored as the confused ramblings of someone no longer capable of making business decisions. "Mr. Wilson, we appreciate your call, but Ms. Wilson has explained your medical situation to us," the Hartwell receptionist said when Dad identified himself. "All business communications need to go through your daughter, Jessica, who has your power of attorney for company matters." Dad's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Jessica had not only stolen his company, she had destroyed his credibility with the people who were buying it. That's when Dr. Patterson called with news that would give us the leverage we needed to stop Jessica's plan completely. Dr. Patterson's call brought unexpected support from someone we hadn't considered as an ally. Sarah Chen, the head of accounting, who had been mysteriously terminated the previous month, had been conducting her own investigation into Jessica's activities. Sarah contacted me after hearing about the federal investigation, Dr. Patterson explained. She has evidence that could completely destroy Jessica's credibility and expose the full scope of her crimes. Sarah arrived at Dad's house 30 minutes later, carrying a briefcase full of financial documents she had copied before her termination. Her story revealed another layer of Jessica's systematic fraud. Jessica didn't just fire me. Sarah began setting up her laptop on Dad's dining room table. She framed me for financial irregularities to remove someone who was starting to question unusual account activity. Sarah had noticed discrepancies in the company's financial records 6 weeks ago. Small amounts disappearing from various accounts invoices for services that didn't match any vendor contracts she could find, and equipment sales that weren't properly documented in the asset management system. When I brought these concerns to Jessica, she told me I was making mistakes due to stress and suggested I take some time off to get my personal issues sorted out. But Sarah had continued investigating on her own time, creating backup copies of every suspicious transaction she discovered. Her evidence showed systematic embezzlement totaling over $800,000, much more than Marcus and I had initially calculated. Jessica created an entire network of false vendor accounts, Sarah explained, showing us detailed spreadsheets tracking the fraudulent transactions. She would approve invoices for non-existent services, then redirect payments to accounts she controlled. The most damaging evidence was a series of recorded conversations Sarah had secretly made when Jessica started pressuring her to stop asking questions about financial irregularities. "You need to understand that Mr. Wilson's condition makes him very sensitive to stress," Jessica's voice said through Sarah's laptop speakers. Questions about accounting procedures upset him and worsen his confusion. As his daughter, I'm asking you to handle these matters more discreetly. Another recording captured Jessica threatening Sarah's employment if she continued investigating unusual transactions. "My father values loyalty above all else. Employees who create unnecessary drama about minor bookkeeping issues don't tend to have long careers with this company." Sarah had been documenting Jessica's intimidation tactics for weeks before her termination. She had recordings, emails, and witness statements from other employees who had been pressured to ignore or cover up questionable financial activities. "I lost my job trying to protect this company from theft," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "But I kept all the evidence because I knew someday the truth would come out." Her documentation revealed that Jessica's embezzlement began almost immediately after she started showing interest in company operations. The timing coincided perfectly with the escalation of her gambling losses, suggesting she had joined the business specifically to fund her addiction rather than to contribute to its success. "The most disturbing part is how she systematically eliminated anyone who might expose her crimes," Sarah continued. 5 longtime employees have been terminated in the past 2 months, all of them people who had the knowledge and access to recognize financial fraud. Sarah's evidence also included communications between Jessica and several of her gambling creditors, showing that she had promised them access to company assets as collateral for her debts. Text messages revealed Jessica describing the business as family money that's technically mine anyway, and assuring her creditors that she would have complete control within weeks. While we reviewed Sarah's evidence, Marcus called with urgent news from the federal investigation. Agent Rodriguez had obtained emergency court orders preventing the completion of the Hartwell sale, but Jessica had apparently anticipated this possibility. "She's not at the Hartwell meeting," Marcus reported. "According to building security, she left through a back exit 20 minutes after arriving. No one knows where she went, but her car is no longer in the parking lot." The realization hit us simultaneously. Jessica had used the Hartwell meeting as a diversion while she implemented an alternative plan we hadn't anticipated. Sarah's phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, Jessica's voice filled the room through the speaker. "Hello, Sarah. I know you're with my father and my sister right now. You've all been very busy today, haven't you?" The tone was calm, almost conversational, but something underneath it made my skin crawl. "I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done to try to protect the family business," Jessica continued, "but you're interfering with something much bigger than you understand." She explained that while we had been focused on stopping the Hartwell sale, she had been implementing what she called Plan B, emergency asset liquidation through private buyers who didn't require the same legal documentation as corporate acquisitions. "By tonight, I'll have enough cash to resolve my immediate obligations. The people I owe money to aren't interested in legal proceedings or federal investigations. They just want payment, and they've made it very clear what happens to families who don't deliver." The threat was unmistakable. Jessica was claiming that her gambling creditors would target our entire family if she didn't pay her debts immediately. "Dad, Sonia, I need you both to understand that I never wanted things to go this far." Jessica's voice continued now, directed at us specifically. "But I'm in a situation where protecting myself means protecting all of you. These aren't people who accept partial payments or extended deadlines." Dad found his voice anger overriding confusion for the first time in months. "Jessica, what you're doing is criminal. You've stolen from the company, lied about Sonia, manipulated my medical care, and now you're threatening the family. This has to stop." Jessica's laugh held no humor. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly because of your condition. I'm the only one trying to keep this family safe. But if you continue interfering with my efforts to resolve this situation, you'll leave me no choice but to let you face the consequences of my debts." The call ended abruptly, leaving us staring at each other in stunned silence. Jessica had just threatened to expose our family to violent criminals if we continued trying to stop her theft. Sarah broke the silence first. "She's lost touch with reality if she thinks threatening your family will make her crimes disappear. We have enough evidence to send her to federal prison for years." But Dad looked terrified rather than angry. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "If Jessica really owes money to the kind of people who make violent threats, stopping her might put all of us in danger." Agent Rodriguez arrived at Dad's house within the hour, bringing additional federal agents and a plan that would either save our family or expose us to exactly the kind of danger Dad feared. "We've been monitoring Jessica's communications with her gambling creditors as part of a larger investigation into organized crime activities," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Her debts are connected to criminal organizations we've been tracking for months. The federal investigation had revealed that Jessica's gambling problems were part of a broader pattern. The underground poker games and illegal sports betting operations she had been involved with were run by criminal syndicates that specialized in targeting vulnerable people and then using their desperation to facilitate money laundering and other illegal activities. Your sister isn't just a victim of gambling addiction," Agent Rodriguez continued. "She's been used as a conduit for criminal organizations to gain access to legitimate businesses that can be exploited for financial crimes." The revelation explained why Jessica's creditors had been so interested in the family business. They weren't just seeking payment for gambling debts. They wanted access to a profitable company that could be used to launder money from other criminal activities. The good news is that we now have enough evidence to charge Jessica with multiple federal crimes and to dismantle the criminal network that's been exploiting her, Agent Rodriguez said. "The challenging part is doing this safely considering the threats these organizations make against family members." She outlined a plan that would require Dad and me to participate in what essentially amounted to a federal sting operation. Jessica had agreed to meet with her creditors that evening to deliver payment, apparently still believing she could liquidate company assets quickly enough to satisfy their demands. "We want to arrest the criminal organization leaders during that meeting, while simultaneously taking Jessica into custody for her crimes against your family," Agent Rodriguez explained. "But we need your cooperation to make sure she actually shows up." The plan required Dad to call Jessica and agree to sign additional authorization documents that would give her access to his personal assets. This would convince her that she had successfully manipulated him into compliance while giving federal agents time to position themselves for the arrest operation. The risk is that if something goes wrong, Jessica's creditors might decide to target your family directly, Agent Rodriguez warned. These are people who have demonstrated willingness to use violence to collect debts. Dad was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and determined. Jessica made her choices when she decided to steal from the family and lie about Sonia. I won't let her destroy everything we've built to cover up her mistakes, and I won't let criminals use our business for illegal activities. Sarah offered to help coordinate the sting operation using her knowledge of the company's financial systems. Marcus agreed to provide technical support for documenting the asset transfers Jessica would attempt during the meeting with her creditors. "There's one more thing you should know," Agent Rodriguez said as we prepared to implement the plan. "Our investigation has revealed that Jessica has been planning this scheme for almost a year. The gambling addiction was real, but her decision to target your family business was calculated and deliberate." She showed us communications between Jessica and criminal associates discussing the best strategies for gaining control of family assets. Jessica had researched Dad's medical history, identified his cognitive vulnerabilities, and developed specific tactics for manipulating his trust while destroying his confidence in me. "Your sister didn't just make bad choices that spiraled out of control," Agent Rodriguez explained. "She made deliberate decisions to commit crimes against her own family as part of a broader criminal conspiracy." The evidence revealed that Jessica had been receiving coaching from experienced con artists about how to manipulate elderly family members and exploit their medical conditions for financial gain. Her transformation from disinterested art student to concerned business partner had been carefully orchestrated to position herself for this theft. The people she owes money to specifically target individuals with access to family businesses or inherited wealth. They provide gambling credit to create debt, then offer solutions that involve stealing from family members to pay what's owed. As evening approached, we prepared for what Agent Rodriguez called the most complex family-based financial crimes operation her office had ever coordinated. Federal agents were positioning themselves around the meeting location, while technical specialists prepared to document every transaction Jessica attempted. "Remember," Agent Rodriguez said as Dad prepared to make the crucial phone call to Jessica, "our goal is to protect your family while dismantling a criminal organization that has victimized dozens of other families across the region. What your sister did to you is part of a much larger pattern of elder abuse and family fraud." Dad's hands shook slightly as he dialed Jessica's number, but his voice was clear and confident when she answered. "Jessica, I've been thinking about our conversation this afternoon. I realize now that you're trying to protect the family, and I want to help you resolve this situation safely." Jessica's response was immediate and filled with relief. "Dad, I'm so glad you understand. I know this has been confusing for you, but I really am trying to do what's best for everyone. I'm prepared to sign whatever documents you need to access my personal accounts." Dad continued following the script Agent Rodriguez had provided. "But I want to be present when you meet with these people tonight. As the family patriarch, I should take responsibility for resolving this crisis." There was a long pause before Jessica responded. "Dad, that's not necessary. These are dangerous people and your condition makes you vulnerable to stress. I can handle this meeting on my own." "I insist," Dad said firmly. "This is my family and my responsibility. Text me the location and time and I'll meet you there." After ending the call, we waited in tense silence for Jessica to respond. When her text arrived 20 minutes later, Agent Rodriguez smiled grimly. "She's agreed to meet at exactly the location we expected. Our surveillance teams are already in position, and we'll have multiple arrest teams ready to move simultaneously." Everything depended on Jessica believing she had successfully manipulated Dad one final time while being unaware that federal agents were documenting every aspect of her criminal activities. The next few hours would either end Jessica's systematic destruction of our family or expose us to the violence she had been warning us about throughout this entire ordeal. The meeting location Jessica had chosen was a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place where legitimate business deals never happened. Agent Rodriguez confirmed that federal surveillance teams had identified at least 6 individuals associated with the criminal organization already present at the location. "This is bigger than just collecting Jessica's gambling debt," Agent Rodriguez explained through her earpiece as we approached the warehouse. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning to use tonight's meeting to finalize arrangements for laundering money through your family business." Dad sat beside me in the passenger seat, looking more alert and focused than I had seen him in months. The clarity that came with understanding Jessica's manipulation had apparently strengthened his resolve to protect what remained of our family. "I keep thinking about when Jessica was 8 years old," Dad said quietly as we parked a block away from the warehouse. "She fell off her bike and scraped her knee badly. Instead of crying or asking for help, she lied and told me that Sonia had pushed her." He shook his head sadly. I knew even then that Jessica had a tendency to blame others for problems she created herself, but I never imagined she would be willing to destroy her own family to avoid facing the consequences of her choices. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through our earpieces. "Target has arrived at the location. We're observing Jessica entering the warehouse with a briefcase and what appears to be legal documents. All arrest teams are in position." The plan required Dad and me to enter the warehouse 15 minutes after Jessica giving federal agents time to position themselves and begin recording the criminal conspiracy. Our role was to provide testimony about Jessica's crimes while she was in the presence of her criminal associates. Remember, Agent Rodriguez had warned us earlier. Once we initiate arrests, the situation could become unpredictable very quickly. These are people who have demonstrated willingness to use violence, and they may view your family as obstacles to their criminal activities. As we approached the warehouse entrance, I could hear voices through the thin metal walls. Jessica's voice, higher pitched than usual, was explaining something urgently to people who responded with short, aggressive questions. "I told you the family business was worth $8 million, Jessica was saying. "But my father's condition has made liquidating assets more complicated than I anticipated." A man's voice, presumably Tony from Pacific Financial Services, responded with barely contained anger. "Complications weren't part of our agreement, sweetheart. You promised payment tonight, and we've already invested significant resources in this operation." Through a grimy window, we could see Jessica standing in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by 5 men in expensive suits. Her briefcase was open on a makeshift table, papers scattered across the surface. She looked terrified, but was trying to project confidence. "The federal investigation has frozen some company accounts temporarily." Jessica continued, her voice shaking slightly. "But my father is signing documents tonight that will give me access to his personal assets. We're talking about real estate worth over $3 million, plus investment accounts and insurance policies." Another voice, rougher than Tony's, interrupted her explanation. "You've been feeding us promises for weeks while your debt keeps growing with interest and penalties. Our patience has run out." That's when Dad and I entered the warehouse, following Agent Rodriguez's instructions exactly. The conversation stopped immediately as all eyes turned toward us. "Dad," Jessica said, her relief obvious, "thank you for coming. These gentlemen are here to help us resolve the financial issues I mentioned." Dad walked toward the group with surprising confidence, his voice clear and strong. "Jessica, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's really been happening with our family business." The change in his demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the confused, manipulated man Jessica had been controlling for months. In his place stood the decisive business leader who had built Wilson Logistics from nothing. "Gentlemen," Dad continued, addressing Jessica's creditors directly, "I'm Thomas Wilson, and I believe my daughter has been misrepresenting both her authority over family assets and our willingness to be involved in whatever business arrangements you've made with her." Jessica's face went pale. "Dad, your condition makes these conversations confusing for you. Why don't you let me handle the business discussions?" "My condition?" Dad's voice rose with genuine anger. You mean the condition you've been deliberately worsening by manipulating my medication, or the condition you've been lying about to doctors and lawyers to gain control over my assets? The criminal associates looked confused, clearly not understanding the family dynamics they had walked into. Tony stepped forward, his patience obviously exhausted. I don't care about your family problems, he said coldly. Jessica Wilson owes us $200,000 plus interest. Someone is paying that debt tonight, or we start pursuing alternative collection methods. That's when Agent Rodriguez's voice came through hidden speakers positioned around the warehouse. Federal agents, everyone remain exactly where you are and place your hands where we can be seen. The warehouse suddenly filled with agents in tactical gear, moving with practiced precision to surround Jessica and her criminal associates. Red laser dots from sniper rifles appeared on the chests of every person in the building as backup teams secured all exits. Jessica's reaction was immediate and desperate. Instead of accepting arrest gracefully, she grabbed a gun from one of Tony's associates and pointed it directly at Dad. Nobody moves, she screamed, her voice breaking with panic. I've worked too hard to let everything fall apart now. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Jessica's panicked breathing. Federal agents had weapons trained on her, but they couldn't risk firing with Dad so close to the line of fire. Jessica. Agent Rodriguez called out from behind cover. Put the weapon down. You're already facing federal charges that carry significant prison time. Adding assault with a deadly weapon and threatening a federal witness will only make your situation worse. My situation? Jessica laughed hysterically. My situation is that these people will kill my entire family if I don't pay them tonight. You think federal prison is worse than what happens to families who don't pay their debts to organizations like this? Tony and his associates were lying flat on the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs, but Tony managed to speak. She's right about one thing, agents. This debt doesn't disappear just because you arrest us tonight. Our organization has resources you can't protect her family from. Dad stepped closer to Jessica, showing no fear despite having a gun pointed at his chest. Jessica, this is over. You've committed crimes against your own family, and now you're threatening to hurt the people who love you most. Whatever problems you've created, violence isn't going to solve them. Love me. Jessica's voice was filled with years of accumulated resentment. You've always loved Sonia more than me. She got the business opportunities, the education support, the trust and respect. I was just the artistic daughter who wasn't smart enough for the family business. Her words revealed a depth of sibling jealousy and perceived injustice that explained, though didn't excuse, her willingness to destroy our family to escape her self-created problems. That's not true, Dad said gently. You chose to pursue art instead of business. We supported your choices and celebrated your talents. But that doesn't mean you were entitled to steal what Sonia earned through 20 years of dedication. Jessica's grip on the gun wavered as emotion overwhelmed her anger. I never wanted it to go this far. The gambling started small, just entertainment. But when I started losing, I convinced myself I could win back enough to pay the debts and no one would ever know. When that didn't work, you decided to steal from the family instead of asking for help, I said, speaking directly to Jessica for the first time since entering the warehouse. Ask for help. Jessica's laugh was bitter. Ask the perfect daughter and the successful father to bail out the family failure. I'd rather die than give you both another reason to look down on me. Agent Rodriguez seized the moment of emotional distraction to move closer. Jessica, you have a choice right now. You can put the weapon down and accept responsibility for your actions, or you can make this situation infinitely worse for everyone involved. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jessica kept the gun trained on Dad, while federal agents maintained their positions, creating a deadly stalemate that could end tragically with the slightest wrong move. That's when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Agent Rodriguez signaled for me to answer, hoping it might provide some distraction that would give them an opportunity to safely disarm Jessica. Sonia Wilson. The voice was professional, authoritative. Yes, this is Sonia. This is Judge Margaret Chen from the Federal District Court. I'm calling about an emergency hearing that's been requested regarding your family's business assets and your father's legal capacity. My blood turned cold. Even while holding our family hostage, Jessica had apparently set additional legal maneuvers in motion. Your sister Jessica filed emergency petitions this afternoon claiming that your father is mentally incompetent and that you've been exploiting his condition to steal company assets. Judge Chen continued. She's requesting immediate guardianship and asking the court to freeze all family assets pending investigation. The phone was on speaker and Jessica's expression shifted from desperation to renewed confidence as she heard the judge's words. That's right, Jessica called out loudly enough for the judge to hear. I'm trying to protect my father from Sonia's schemes, but she's brought federal agents here to intimidate me into withdrawing my legal requests. Judge Chen's voice carried confusion and concern. Ms. Wilson, are you in some kind of dangerous situation? Should I contact local law enforcement? Agent Rodriguez moved closer to my phone. Your Honor, this is Special Agent Rodriguez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're currently arresting Jessica Wilson and several associates for elder abuse embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud. The legal documents she filed today were part of an elaborate scheme to steal from her own family. I'm going to need verification of these claims before proceeding with any legal actions, Judge Chen replied carefully. This situation sounds extremely complex, and I want to ensure that all parties' rights are protected. Jessica's lawyer had apparently been more thorough than we realized. While we were focused on stopping the asset sales and protecting Dad from her criminal creditors, she had been implementing a parallel legal strategy designed to make her appear as the concerned family member protecting an incompetent father from an exploitative daughter. Your Honor. Dad spoke directly into the phone, his voice clear and strong. I am Thomas Wilson, and I am calling to formally withdraw any legal requests my daughter Jessica has made on my behalf. I was not mentally competent to authorize those requests when they were filed due to medication manipulation and systematic psychological abuse. Mr. Wilson, I'll need medical documentation and formal legal representation before I can make any determinations about your capacity or the validity of documents filed in your name, Judge Chen replied. Dr. Patterson, who had been monitoring the situation from Agent Rodriguez's mobile command unit, requested to speak with the judge directly. Your Honor, this is Dr. Elizabeth Patterson, Mr. Wilson's treating physician. I have comprehensive medical evidence showing that Jessica Wilson has been falsifying medical records and manipulating her father's medication to impair his decision-making capacity. The phone conversation was providing exactly the distraction Agent Rodriguez needed. While Jessica focused on the legal implications of the judge's call, federal agents were slowly repositioning themselves for a coordinated response. But Jessica noticed the movement and became even more agitated. "Everyone stop right there!" she screamed, pressing the gun closer to Dad's chest. "I know what you're trying to do, and I won't let you destroy the only chance I have to save my family from these criminals." Tony, still lying on the warehouse floor with his hands restrained, managed to speak loud enough for everyone to hear. For what it's worth, the girl's right about the consequences of not paying her debts. Our organization doesn't forget family members who interfere with debt collection. Agent Rodriguez had heard enough. Mr. Torino, you're already facing federal racketeering charges. Continuing to make threats against victims' families will add additional decades to your prison sentence. Prison sentences don't scare people in our line of work, Agent. We have resources outside these walls that extend far beyond what your federal protection programs can handle. The criminal organization's threats added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. Even if we successfully arrested Jessica and her immediate criminal associates, their broader network might continue targeting our family for interfering with their illegal activities. Judge Chen had been listening to the entire exchange and was beginning to understand the true scope of what was happening. This appears to be a federal criminal matter that extends far beyond family business disputes. I'm ordering all civil proceedings suspended pending resolution of the criminal charges. Jessica's last hope for legal legitimacy had just disappeared. The court would not be granting her emergency guardianship or freezing family assets to prevent my supposed exploitation of Dad's condition. Jessica. Agent Rodriguez called out, "You no longer have any legal avenues for claiming authority over your family's assets. Your gambling creditors are in federal custody. Your civil court petitions have been suspended. The only choice left is whether you surrender peacefully or continue making the situation worse." But Jessica's response revealed the depth of her psychological breakdown. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice taking on an almost childlike quality. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be important to this family for once. Sonia always got the attention, the opportunities, the respect. I thought if I could save the business from her supposed betrayal, Dad would finally see me as the responsible daughter." Her confession revealed that beneath the systematic fraud and manipulation was a woman who had never felt valued by the family she was now willing to destroy. Years of perceived favoritism and sibling rivalry had culminated in this desperate attempt to prove her worth through criminal means. The gambling addiction was real. Jessica continued, tears streaming down her face. "But part of me was almost glad when the debts got out of control because it finally gave me a reason to get involved in the business. I thought I could solve the financial problems and prove I was just as capable as Sonia." Dad's voice was filled with pain as he responded to Jessica's revelation. "Jessica, you were always important to this family. Your artistic talents, your creativity, your unique perspective on life, all of those things made us proud. But you chose to see yourself as less valuable because you weren't interested in business. I convinced myself that stealing from the company was really protecting it." Jessica said, her grip on the gun loosening slightly. That lying about Sonia was really saving Dad from being exploited. I created this whole narrative where I was the hero and everyone else was the threat. Agent Rodriguez recognized that Jessica's emotional breakdown might provide the opportunity they needed to end the standoff safely. What happened next shocked everyone in the warehouse, including the federal agents who thought they understood the complete scope of Jessica's crimes. Dad slowly reached into his jacket pocket, moving carefully to avoid startling Jessica or triggering a violent response from the federal agents positioned around them. "Jessica," Dad said calmly, "there's something I need to show you, something that might help you understand why your plan was never going to work." He pulled out a small digital recording device, the kind lawyers use for dictating notes. Jessica stared at it in confusion, while Agent Rodriguez signaled her team to remain ready but hold their positions. "I've been recording our conversations for the past 3 weeks." Dad explained, his voice steady despite the gun still pointed at his chest. "Not all of them, but enough to document what you've been doing to me and to this family." Jessica's face went white as the implications of his words sank in. "That's impossible. Your condition makes you too confused to plan something like that." "That's what you wanted everyone to believe," Dad replied. "And for a while, your medication manipulation and constant gaslighting made me question my own judgment about everything. But I had moments of clarity, especially when you weren't around to interfere with my thinking." He activated the recording device and Jessica's voice filled the warehouse with devastating clarity. "Dad, I need you to understand that Sonia has been meeting with competitors behind your back," the recorded Jessica said. "I have proof that she's been sharing customer lists and pricing information with Hartwell Industries." "That doesn't sound like something Sonia would do," Dad's recorded voice replied, but he sounded uncertain and tired. "I know it's hard to believe, but I've seen the evidence. She's planning to start her own company using everything she's learned from working at Wilson Logistics. The only way to protect what you've built is to transfer control to someone you can trust." The recording continued with Jessica systematically dismantling my reputation while positioning herself as Dad's only protection against my supposed schemes. But what made the recording truly damaging was Dad's questions between Jessica's accusations. "Jessica, how do you know about these meetings with competitors? Have you been following Sonia or investigating her activities?" "I've been watching out for the family's interests," recorded, Jessica replied. "Someone needs to pay attention to what's really happening around here." "And you're sure about the evidence you mentioned? You actually have proof that Sonia is sharing confidential information?" There was a long pause before Jessica's voice continued, but this time her tone was different, less confident. "Dad, your memory issues make it difficult for you to remember all the details. You need to trust me to handle these complicated family matters." Agent Rodriguez was recording the current conversation while Jessica's own words played back her systematic manipulation of our father. The contrast between Jessica's confident accusations and her evasive responses to direct questions revealed the fraudulent nature of her claims. But the most devastating part of Dad's recording came next. "Jessica, I want to ask you directly," Dad's voice said through the device. "Have you been honest with me about Sonia's supposed betrayal? Are you telling me the truth about these meetings with competitors and stolen customer information?" The silence on the recording stretched for almost 30 seconds before Jessica finally responded. "Dad, these questions upset me because they suggest you don't trust my judgment. I'm trying to protect this family, and questioning my motives makes me feel like you don't appreciate what I'm doing." "That's not an answer to my question," recorded Dad pressed. "I'm asking whether you have actual evidence of Sonia's supposed crimes or whether you're making accusations based on suspicions and assumptions." Another long pause, then Jessica's voice sounding younger and more vulnerable. "I know in my heart that Sonia doesn't care about this family the way I do. She's always been more interested in advancing her own career than protecting what you've built. Maybe I don't have concrete proof, but I know I'm right about her intentions." The recording revealed that Jessica had been unable to provide actual evidence for any of her accusations, even when pressed directly by the person she was supposedly protecting. "There's more," Dad said, still holding the recording device but speaking directly to Jessica and the federal agents. "I wasn't just recording our conversations randomly. I started documenting everything after Dr. Patterson called me directly to express concerns about my medical care." He explained that 3 weeks ago, Dr. Patterson had managed to reach him during one of Jessica's absences from the house. The doctor was concerned about missed appointments, canceled tests, and conflicting information she was receiving about his condition. "Dr. Patterson told me that Jessica had been interfering with my medical care and possibly falsifying information in my medical records. That's when I realized I needed to start documenting what was really happening to me." Dad had been more aware of Jessica's manipulation than anyone realized. The recording device had captured not just her lies about me, but her threats against other family members, her discussions of gambling debts, and most importantly, her admissions that she had been exaggerating his mental incapacity to maintain control over his decisions. On this recording from last Tuesday, Dad continued advancing the device to a different conversation. Jessica explicitly states that she's been managing my medication schedule to keep me cooperative during important meetings. Jessica's voice came through the speakers. Dad's good days and bad days seem to coincide with whether he's willing to sign the documents I need him to approve. I've learned that adjusting his evening medications helps ensure he's more receptive to family discussions the next morning. Agent Rodriguez looked stunned. "Mr. Wilson, are you telling us that you've been conducting your own investigation into your daughter's crimes for the past 3 weeks? I'm telling you that a man doesn't build a successful business over 30 years without learning to recognize when someone is lying to him," Dad replied firmly. "Jessica's manipulation worked for a while because my cognitive issues made me doubt my own judgment. But when Dr. Patterson warned me that someone was interfering with my medical care, I realized I needed to gather evidence of what was really happening. The recording device contained hours of conversations documenting Jessica's systematic elder abuse, financial fraud, and manipulation of family relationships. More importantly, it captured her admitting to crimes she had denied when confronted by other family members. Jessica, Dad said, looking directly at his youngest daughter while federal agents maintained their positions around the warehouse. "I want you to listen to one more recording. This one is from yesterday morning, right before you convinced me to sign those company transfer documents." He activated a final recording that would change everything about how we understood Jessica's motivations and mental state. The final recording Dad played revealed a conversation that explained everything about Jessica's psychological state and her willingness to destroy our family to escape her self-created problems. "Dad, I need you to understand that signing these papers isn't just about protecting the business from Sonia," Jessica's recorded voice said. "It's about protecting all of us from people who will hurt our family if they don't get paid." "What people, Jessica, who are you talking about?" "The people I owe money to aren't just creditors, Dad. They're criminals who use violence to collect debts. If I don't pay them this week, they've threatened to hurt you and Sonia to pressure me into finding the money." The recording captured Jessica admitting that her gambling debts involved criminal organizations that threatened family members to ensure payment. She'd been stealing from the company, not just to pay her own debts, but because she believed her criminal creditors would target Dad and me if she failed to deliver payment. "Why didn't you come to the family for help when the gambling first became a problem?" Dad's recorded voice asked. "Because I was ashamed," Jessica replied, her voice breaking with emotion. "I was the artistic daughter who never contributed anything meaningful to the family business. I couldn't admit that I had also become the gambling addict who was destroying everything you and Sonia had worked to build." The conversation revealed layers of self-loathing shame and distorted thinking that had driven Jessica to increasingly desperate measures. She had convinced herself that stealing from the family was actually protecting them, and that destroying my reputation was necessary to save everyone from the consequences of her addiction. "Jessica, you know that Sonia never betrayed the company or planned to steal from the family," Dad's recorded voice said gently. "I know," Jessica admitted in the recording. "I made up those stories because I needed you to believe that giving me control of the business was protecting the family rather than helping me commit crimes against it." The recorded confession was legally devastating, but it also revealed a woman who understood the wrongfulness of her actions while feeling unable to stop the escalating cycle of lies and theft. As the recording concluded, Agent Rodriguez received an urgent communication through her earpiece. She listened for several seconds, then spoke to the entire warehouse. "Jessica Wilson federal agents have just arrested 6 additional members of the criminal organization that was threatening your family. The arrests are part of a coordinated operation across 3 states targeting illegal gambling operations and associated criminal activities." The news visibly deflated Jessica's remaining defiance. The criminal network she had feared was being dismantled by federal law enforcement, meaning the threats against our family were being eliminated along with her creditors. "You don't understand," Jessica said weakly, lowering the gun slightly. "These people have connections everywhere. Arresting the local leaders won't stop their organization from retaliating against families who interfere with their business." Agent Rodriguez stepped closer, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had successfully prosecuted organized crime cases for years. "Jessica, the criminal network you're afraid of is called the Torino Family Organization. We've been investigating them for 18 months as part of a federal racketeering case involving money laundering, illegal gambling, and extortion across the southeastern United States." She explained that Jessica's gambling debts were just one small part of a massive federal investigation that had been building cases against the organization's leadership for over a year. The arrests tonight would effectively dismantle the group's operations in our region. "The people who threatened your family will be in federal prison for decades," Agent Rodriguez continued. Their organization will be bankrupted through asset forfeiture proceedings. There will be no retaliation because there will be no organization left to retaliate. Jessica stared at the agent, trying to process the information that her desperate criminal scheme had been unnecessary. The threats that drove her to steal from our family and manipulate Dad's medical condition were about to disappear through federal law enforcement action. "But my debts," Jessica said quietly. "I still owe them $200,000. Debts to criminal organizations engaged in illegal gambling operations are not legally enforceable," Agent Rodriguez replied. "You don't owe money to people who are about to be convicted of federal racketeering charges." The revelation that Jessica's gambling debts were about to become legally meaningless seemed to break whatever psychological hold they had maintained over her decision-making. She lowered the gun completely and sank to her knees in the middle of the warehouse. "I destroyed my family for nothing," she whispered. "Everything I did to Dad and Sonia was for nothing." That's when the warehouse doors opened and additional federal agents entered. But these agents were escorting someone I hadn't expected to see. Dr. William Harper, the psychiatrist Jessica had planned to use for having Dad declared incompetent, walked into the warehouse accompanied by federal investigators. "Dr. Harper has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for leniency regarding his participation in Jessica's scheme," Agent Rodriguez announced. "He's prepared to testify about the fraudulent competency evaluation Jessica requested and the illegal guardianship proceedings she was attempting to initiate." Dr. Harper looked ashamed as he addressed Dad directly. "Mr. Wilson, I want to apologize for agreeing to participate in what I now understand was an elaborate elder abuse scheme. Your daughter convinced me that you were suffering from severe dementia and that your other daughter was financially exploiting your condition." The doctor explained that Jessica had provided falsified medical records and coach testimonies designed to make Dad appear incapable of managing his own affairs. The competency evaluation scheduled for the next morning would have been rigged to support Jessica's guardianship petition. "I should have conducted independent medical verification before agreeing to evaluate your capacity," Dr. Harper admitted. "Jessica's documentation seemed thorough, but I failed to follow proper protocols for ensuring its authenticity." Agent Rodriguez had one final surprise that would complete the federal case against Jessica and her criminal associates. Mr. Wilson, Dr. Harper has provided us with recordings of his conversations with Jessica, where she explicitly discusses her plans to have you declared incompetent so she could liquidate your assets to pay gambling debts to criminal organizations. The additional evidence meant Jessica would face federal charges for elder abuse, wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy, and attempting to defraud federal bankruptcy proceedings. The sentences for these crimes could total several decades in federal prison. But as I watched Jessica kneeling on the warehouse floor, crying and surrounded by federal agents, I felt something I hadn't expected: profound sadness for the sister I had lost to addiction, shame, and distorted thinking. 6 hours later, after Jessica had been taken into federal custody and the criminal organization members had been transported to federal holding facilities, Dad and I found ourselves sitting in Agent Rodriguez's office trying to process everything that had happened. "The good news is that your family is safe and the threats against you have been eliminated," Agent Rodriguez said, reviewing the paperwork from the evening's arrests. "The criminal organization that was pressuring Jessica has been effectively dismantled, and their leaders will be facing federal prison sentences that ensure they won't be threatening anyone for decades." The financial recovery process would be more complex. Jessica had successfully stolen over $800,000 from company accounts, sold equipment worth hundreds of thousands more, and canceled contracts that would take months to renegotiate. But Agent Rodriguez was optimistic about recovering most of the stolen assets. "Federal asset forfeiture laws allow us to recover money and property that were purchased with proceeds from criminal activities," she explained. "We've already frozen the accounts where Jessica deposited stolen company funds, and we're working to reverse the equipment sales she conducted through fraudulent authorization." More importantly, the legal documents Jessica had used to gain control of company assets were being invalidated based on evidence of fraud, elder abuse, and Dad's compromised mental state during the signing process. Dr. Patterson's medical testimony and your father's own recordings provide compelling evidence that Jessica exploited cognitive impairment to obtain fraudulent authorization for financial transactions. Agent Rodriguez continued, "Courts take elder abuse very seriously, especially when it involves systematic manipulation of someone's medical condition." Dad had been quiet throughout most of the debriefing, but finally spoke up with a question that had been troubling him since the warehouse confrontation. "Agent Rodriguez, do you think Jessica understood how wrong her actions were, or did her gambling addiction and desperation impair her judgment to the point where she genuinely believed she was protecting the family?" The question reflected Dad's struggle to reconcile his love for Jessica with the magnitude of her crimes against our family. Agent Rodriguez considered her response carefully. "Based on the evidence we've collected, including the recordings your daughter made and Dr. Harper's testimony, Jessica demonstrated clear understanding that her actions were criminal and harmful to her family," the agent replied. "Her decision to manipulate medical records, forge documents, and systematically lie about Sonia's supposed crimes shows deliberate planning rather than impaired judgment." She explained that gambling addiction could certainly contribute to poor decision-making, but it didn't excuse systematic fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy with criminal organizations. Jessica made calculated choices to commit crimes against her family rather than seek help for her addiction or accept responsibility for her debts, Agent Rodriguez concluded. "Those choices reflect character issues that extend beyond the influence of gambling addiction." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Patterson, who had been monitoring Dad's medical condition throughout the evening's traumatic events. "Mr. Wilson, I want to discuss your cognitive evaluation results and what they mean for your ongoing medical care," Dr. Patterson said, joining our meeting. The neurological testing had confirmed early-stage cognitive impairment, but Dr. Patterson explained that Dad's condition had been significantly worsened by Jessica's medication manipulation and psychological abuse. "With proper medication management and the elimination of the systematic stress Jessica was creating, your cognitive function should improve substantially," she said. "The confusion and memory issues you've been experiencing were partly medical and partly the result of deliberate manipulation designed to make you question your own judgment." Dr. Patterson recommended ongoing medical monitoring and cognitive therapy to help Dad rebuild confidence in his decision-making abilities. But she was optimistic that he would be able to continue managing his personal affairs and participating in business decisions with appropriate support. "The most important thing is ensuring you're protected from anyone who might try to exploit your medical condition for personal gain," she added, glancing meaningfully in my direction. That comment prompted Dad to address something he had been thinking about since the warehouse confrontation. "Sonia, there's something I need to tell you about the past few months." Dad said, his voice serious but clear. "I wasn't as confused by Jessica's manipulation as everyone believed I was." He explained that while his cognitive impairment was real, he had maintained more awareness of Jessica's systematic deception than he had let anyone know. The recording device and documentation of her crimes hadn't been desperate measures taken by a confused old man. They had been deliberate investigative activities conducted by someone who suspected he was being manipulated. "I needed to be certain about what Jessica was doing before I could take action to stop her," Dad continued. "But I also needed to understand whether you would fight to protect the family when everything seemed lost, or whether you would simply accept defeat and walk away." The revelation was stunning. Dad had essentially used Jessica's betrayal as a test of my character and commitment to the family legacy. "I'm proud of how you handled this crisis," Dad said, looking directly at me. "You investigated the truth instead of accepting defeat. You protected me from medical exploitation. You worked with law enforcement to ensure justice was served. And you did all of this despite believing you had lost everything." Dr. Patterson and Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances, clearly surprised by Dad's revelation that he had been more aware and strategic throughout the crisis than anyone had realized. Mr. Wilson, are you saying that you deliberately allowed Jessica to believe her manipulation was successful while you were actually gathering evidence of her crimes? Agent Rodriguez asked. I'm saying that a man doesn't build a successful business over 30 years without learning to recognize when family members are lying to him, Dad replied firmly. Jessica's accusations against Sonia never made sense given what I knew about both of my daughter's characters. He had suspected Jessica's gambling problems months before she began stealing from the company. Business associates had mentioned seeing her at underground poker games, and her sudden interest in company finances coincided with what appeared to be financial desperation. But I needed to know how far Jessica was willing to go to cover her debts, and I needed to see whether Sonia would abandon the family or fight to save it when faced with what appeared to be insurmountable betrayal. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus, who arrived with financial reports showing the full extent of damage to Wilson Logistics and preliminary assessments of recovery prospects. The good news is that most of our customer relationships remained intact because Jessica didn't have time to complete the systematic destruction she was planning, Marcus reported. The contracts she canceled can be renegotiated, and the equipment she sold can be replaced without destroying our operational capacity. More importantly, several customers had contacted the company, expressing concern about rumors of financial instability. When Marcus explained that the problems were caused by criminal activities that had been resolved through federal law enforcement action, most customers expressed relief and renewed confidence in the company's leadership. Wilson Logistics has a reputation for integrity and reliability that was built over decades, Marcus continued. Jessica's crimes damaged our finances, but they didn't destroy the relationships and reputation that make this company valuable. Agent Rodriguez concluded our meeting with news that would determine Jessica's legal fate. Jessica Wilson has agreed to plead guilty to all federal charges in exchange for cooperation with our ongoing investigation into organized crime activities, she announced. Her sentence will likely be between 5 and 8 years in federal prison, with mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment programs. The plea agreement included full restitution for stolen assets and cooperation with civil proceedings to recover damage caused by her fraud. Jessica would also be required to provide testimony in additional cases against other members of the criminal organization. Your sister has expressed desire to apologize to her family and make whatever amends are possible given the severity of her actions, Agent Rodriguez added. Dad was quiet for a long moment before responding. I hope Jessica uses her time in prison to address the addiction and character issues that led her to betray her own family. But forgiveness will require genuine acknowledgement of the harm she caused and authentic efforts to change her behavior. As we prepared to leave the federal building that morning, I realized that while Jessica's betrayal had been devastating, it had also revealed strengths in our family relationships that I hadn't fully appreciated before the crisis. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated conference room at Wilson Logistics, looking at financial reports that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of Jessica's betrayal. Not only had we recovered from her systematic theft and sabotage, but the company had grown beyond anything we had achieved before the crisis. The employee wellness programs I had established years earlier became a model for other logistics companies dealing with high-stress working conditions. Our customer retention rate reached 97% as clients appreciated our transparency about the criminal activities that had threatened the company and our decisive response to protect their interests. Most importantly, the innovations I had implemented in automated tracking and customer service systems had attracted attention from major manufacturing firms looking for reliable logistics partners. We had secured 3 new contracts worth over $5 million annually, expanding our operations beyond anything Dad had envisioned when he started the company 3 decades ago. Marcus knocked on the conference room door carrying the quarterly financial report that would officially confirm our complete recovery from Jessica's crimes. Revenue is up 38% compared to the same period last year. Marcus announced, setting the report on the conference table. More significantly, our profit margins have improved because the operational efficiencies you implemented are now fully integrated into our service delivery. The numbers were impressive, but the personal relationships we had rebuilt meant more to me than financial success. Dad's cognitive function had improved dramatically once Jessica's medication manipulation and psychological abuse ended. His memory remained imperfect, but his judgment and decision-making abilities had returned to levels that allowed him to continue contributing meaningfully to company strategy. Dr. Patterson had been amazed by the improvement in Dad's condition once the systematic stress and medical interference were eliminated. Your father's case demonstrates how elder abuse can exacerbate cognitive impairment, she had explained during a recent appointment. Removing the manipulation and providing proper medical care has allowed his natural mental capabilities to reassert themselves. Dad now lived in an assisted living facility. He had chosen himself surrounded by caring staff and engaged in activities that kept his mind active. On his good days, he came to the office to review financial reports, meet with longtime customers, and share stories about building the business that had become our family's legacy. "You've become everything I hoped when I started this company," Dad said during one of his visits last week. "Someone who understands that business success means nothing without integrity, family loyalty, and genuine care for the people who depend on us." His words meant more to me than any financial achievement or business recognition I could imagine. The criminal organization that had threatened our family was now completely dismantled. Tony and his associates were serving federal prison sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. Their assets had been seized through federal forfeiture proceedings, and their illegal gambling operations had been shut down permanently. Agent Rodriguez had called to inform us that Jessica's cooperation with the federal investigation had led to additional arrests and convictions that effectively eliminated organized crime influence over gambling activities in our region. "Your sister's testimony was instrumental in prosecuting the leadership of a criminal organization that had victimized dozens of families across multiple states," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Her cooperation doesn't excuse her crimes against your family, but it has prevented other families from experiencing similar exploitation." Jessica was currently serving a 6-year sentence in federal prison with mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment and financial responsibility counseling. She had written several letters expressing remorse for her actions and requesting eventual reconciliation with the family. But Dad and I had agreed that meaningful relationship repair would require demonstrated change over years rather than months. "Forgiveness is possible," Dad had said when discussing Jessica's letters, "but trust must be rebuilt through consistent actions over time. Jessica's crimes against our family were too systematic and deliberate to be dismissed based on written apologies alone." The most satisfying aspect of our recovery was the positive impact on our employees and their families. The wellness programs that Jessica had tried to eliminate were now funded more generously than ever, and our commitment to employee development had attracted talented people who viewed Wilson Logistics as a career destination rather than just a job. Sarah Chen had returned as our head of accounting with additional responsibilities for fraud prevention and financial security. Her experience investigating Jessica's crimes had made her invaluable in developing systems to prevent future internal theft. What happened with Jessica taught us that family businesses are particularly vulnerable to exploitation by people who understand the trust relationships that exist between family members, Sarah explained during a recent staff meeting. "We've implemented safeguards to ensure that no individual, regardless of family connections, can manipulate company assets without multiple layers of verification." The new security measures included independent auditing separation of financial responsibilities and mandatory background checks for anyone with access to company accounts. These precautions felt necessary given what we had learned about the sophisticated nature of Jessica's fraud. But perhaps the most important change was the improvement in communication between Dad and me. The crisis had eliminated any pretense or uncertainty about our mutual respect and shared commitment to the company's values. I realized during the worst days of Jessica's betrayal that I had never explicitly told you how much your contributions meant to the success of this business, Dad said during a recent father-daughter dinner. I assumed you knew, but assumptions can be dangerous when family relationships are under stress. We now had weekly meetings focused not just on business matters, but on personal goals, family relationships, and plans for eventually transitioning company leadership as Dad's condition requires additional support. The difference between you and Jessica wasn't just your commitment to the business, Dad observed. It was your understanding that success requires building something larger than yourself rather than simply taking what you believe you deserve. This afternoon, as I reviewed contracts for 2 additional major clients who wanted to partner with Wilson Logistics, my phone rang with a call I had been expecting but dreading. "This is Jessica," the voice said when I answered. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your time, but I was hoping we could talk." She was calling from federal prison where she would remain for another 4.5 years. Her voice sounded different than I remembered, quieter, less confident, but also more genuine than it had been during her months of manipulation and deception. "I've been participating in addiction treatment and counseling programs, and I'm beginning to understand how distorted my thinking became," Jessica said carefully. "I want to apologize for what I did to you and Dad, but I also want you to know that I'm working to become someone worthy of eventual forgiveness." The conversation was difficult, but it provided hope that Jessica might eventually rebuild some form of relationship with our family. However, that process would require years of demonstrated change rather than words of remorse. "Jessica, I'm glad you're getting treatment and working to understand what led you to betray your own family," I replied. "But rebuilding trust will require consistency over time, not just acknowledgement of past mistakes." After ending the call, I walked to Dad's old office, which had become a quiet space for reflection and planning. On the walls were photos documenting the company's growth over 3 decades, including pictures of Jessica and me as children, helping with simple tasks and dreaming about being part of something important. Looking at those photos, I realized that while Jessica's betrayal had been devastating, it had also clarified what really mattered about family business and personal integrity. The company Dad built wasn't just about financial success. It was about creating something valuable that could be passed on to people who understood its true worth. Wilson Logistics would continue growing and serving customers with the same commitment to excellence that had always defined our approach to business. But now we had the additional strength that comes from surviving a crisis that tested everything we believed about family loyalty and personal character. The future looked brighter than it had ever been, not despite what we had survived, but because of what we had learned about ourselves in the process. So let me ask you something. Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust for their own gain? How did you rebuild after discovering that a family member was willing to sacrifice your relationship for personal advantage? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family business and the courage it takes to fight for what's right. Share this story with anyone who might be dealing with family business conflicts or elder abuse situations. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in facing these challenges makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that even the darkest betrayals can't destroy the strength that comes from integrity, determination, and genuine love for the people and principles that matter most.